Welcome back to Mid-Maryland Votes. One of our favorite returning guests, retired Marine Chris Burnett, is back for the fifth time, fresh off his campaign for Maryland's 6th Congressional District. Chris joins us to talk about life after the election, the shrinking political middle, record low voter turnout, and what the campaign taught him about politics, leadership, and family. Now let's get into it. Welcome to Mid-Maryland Votes. I'm your host, Mark Flynn. With me is my co-host,
Ethan Lowen.
And we have a very distinguished guest, a multiple returning guest, Chris Burnett. Welcome to the program, Chris.
Gentlemen, it's great to be back.
Chris, we followed your election and we were disappointed. I'm sure you are too. That you lost by less than 1,400 votes, I believe. It was really very close race. But, we were shocked because there's no doubt in our minds that you were the candidate to beat in that race.
Well, we were always concerned about a low turnout three-way split. And that's exactly what we got. We got a historically low turnout. It was actually, I want to say it was between 14 and 15,000 votes lower than any time over the past 6 election cycles. So it was an exceptionally low turnout. And then split three ways, this was the scenario that we were concerned about the most. And Mariella came in, she got about 8,000 votes. Vicker pulled off about 16,000 votes. And then I came in right at 14.5, 14.6. So that's how elections go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And from a percentage perspective, I mean, you got 37.4%, and the person who won, Robin Vicker, got 41.8. So you're only talking about 4.4% difference. I mean, that's kind of winning by a nose, so to speak. So, I mean, it was a very impressive run.
Well, and I appreciate that. I mean, we started from scratch. I mean, as we've talked about here before, I came off active duty. I started, a kind of a possible job search. And in talking to my wife and then looking around at what options we had, we realized this was the time to go all in and not have any distractions and run for Congress. And it was a great roller coaster ride in that I was able to include my family. My wife really enjoyed this. She's not a public figure. Initially, she was very apprehensive about taking on a role where she was going to be expected to speak and expected to meet people. But I think in the end, she embraced it because we met so many great people. And to go from nothing to that, a close second, it was a great experience.
You talked about your wife and how she grew into the role. You grew into the role. I mean, essentially 18 months ago, there was not perhaps a single Republican in Maryland who knew the name Chris Burnett. And essentially, I would say that you ramped up faster than any politician I've ever witnessed, to go from 0 to 100, so to speak. What was it that caused that to happen with your campaign?
I be honest, I think it was just being focused in having that I hate to say it, a Marine Corps mindset where there was a singular outcome that we were looking at. And we knew that we had to go through several phases. And when I say we, it was my wife and I talked through this. And I hate to say it, I used military planning. I looked at how I set the conditions for this to occur. And then there was a phase where I had to introduce myself. Then I had a gain trust. And then I had what was ultimately my platform. And so I spent time in each of those phases, first introducing myself, explaining how military service, particularly as a lawyer in the Marine Corps, would translate to being a congressman and how those core values align to Republican values and, more importantly, Western Maryland values. And then pivoted to then developing what was the innovation corridor and the economic development proposal that was ultimately designed to empower local residents, but then to address affordability through opportunity in looking at the national security umbrella, where we could look at job creation, infrastructure, and energy production as a way of addressing what is by far the biggest concern across Maryland, and that is good paying jobs to fix the affordability crisis that has been created by Democrats in Annapolis.
And the affordability is getting less and less. Right now, the statistics are out and they are not good. Our economy is one of the worst in the entire country. 300,000 people have already left Maryland, and there's more. 54% of Marylanders are considering leaving.
And I saw that firsthand, as I was traveling across CD6, which was some of my favorite experiences, whether I did it with my kids, with my wife, or just on the back of the bike. The folks that I met all had the same concerns. The electric bills were out of control. As you get up into Allegheny and Garrett, there were issues of water availability. And then just across all of CD6, there just wasn't jobs. So whether it was their kids leaving because they couldn't find work in Maryland, whether it was families that were being delayed because they couldn't afford to have kids, or you even had young professionals that simply couldn't buy a house. So they didn't see the opportunity. They didn't see a pathway ahead. So it's no question that, the policies that have been created by a Democrat supermajority are failing Marylanders. And then every time you start to look at where their mind could possibly be, they're playing national politics at our expense. They're more interested in opposing the Trump administration. They're more interested in trying to be the California of the East than they are of serving the interests of Marylanders.
It's interesting you mentioned Trump, because that is Governor Moore and every Democrat in Maryland's biggest scapegoat. They blame everything on the federal government and on Trump. But the truth is that every state around us has dealt with the exact same issues, and they're all prospering.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to say it, that's classic incompetence, is that you point a finger and you blame anyone or anything. And I think I actually said it on your show once before. Democrats are the only folks that I know that can cause the problem, point at the problem, and then blame somebody else for the problem they created. And it's amazing that they continue to get away with it.
You missed it, and then be outraged if you actually call them on it and tell them to prove the facts.
Yeah. Or if you offer a solution to fix it, it's like, that's just outrageous.
Fixing the problem, that would take away constituents.
Or we give them one less thing to complain about.
And we don't want to be on here bashing Democrats, because I'm a moderate in the middle. I can see both sides, but the truth is that the Democrats are very good at finding scapegoats for their own issues.
I mean, you'd have to. I mean, how else can you be a supermajority in a failing state and not have a scapegoat? I mean, it's a formula. And it's amazing to me as I meet very intelligent people, advanced degrees, accomplished professionals, and yet they still continue to vote Democrat. And I don't understand it, because and I find myself trying to draw them into a logical discussion and saying, okay, let's actually look at the policies that you favor, what the results of those policies have been, either to favor your immediate interest or your expectation of how we should be organized and how we should govern. And there's rarely an alignment, yet they continue down that path. And I quite frankly, it's irrational. And I stopped trying to understand it as much as I tried to address the underlying concerns in the hope for a crossover effect. And that was the entire design of the innovation corridor, was that it would address those unaffiliated and those centrist Dems, because it was an affordability proposal that was built on economic development and diversifying our economy and energy, as opposed to just speaking it to the margins, which are really just I hate to say it, empty platitudes and bumper stickers. And I didn't want to run a race like that. So the one mistake that we made was, of course, running a general election platform in a primary that was more interested at times in bumper sticker solutions than actual substance.
You mentioned that the turnout was historically low. What do you attribute that to, Chris?
Well, there's a little bit of voter apathy. I think there was folks that had said, there was no point. They don't feel like they have a voice. And so I think that maybe kept some people from voting. If you remember, the weather was not great on the election day. But if you look across the board, there were several opportunities to vote. We have mail-in voting that's incredibly easy. We had early voting. Well, and I went to every early voting site, and I got to be honest, there was no one there. And I would go there and I would want to meet folks and hand out flyers, and quite literally there would be no one there. And then we saw something similar on election day. We had split up and we had volunteers across CD6. I had my family all spread out. My two teenage kids were miserable, but I had them at polling stations. My wife and had the two little ones. And again, we were encountering such small crowds. I was immediately concerned that our worst case scenario was happening.
Now, obviously, there are some career politicians, but most politicians on the local level, certainly. But even in congressional races, such as the one that you did, it's really just average people saying, you know what, I got to throw my hat in the ring and see if I can make a better world for my family, future generations, etc. But there's a lot of personal sacrifice that goes into it. As someone who literally came in just one day and did a full campaign extremely well, how would you describe that process, the effect it's had on your family? What kind of did you learn about politics as an institution?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I came into this, one, with the expectation of I had to introduce myself. I had to demonstrate competency, then I had to gain trust. And I looked at that as a part of that phased approach to how do I move through a congressional district that is, 5 counties and nearly 300 miles long. And what I found, though, wasn't just about winning an election, because I thought if you could introduce yourself and you could establish competency and gain trust, then people would rally behind what would be a winnable campaign. And I found that wasn't necessarily everyone's immediate interest. You have personal interests, you have financial interests. And then, unfortunately, I think you have folks that are benefiting from the status quo. It's very easy to be an opposition individual. You can be opposed to the Democrats, but the minute that you invest yourself in something different, well, now you bear the burden of that outcome, and then you have also the responsibility of governing. So that was an eye-opener to me, and I didn't realize at different times during this process that we were going to get establishment pushback. I never expected to have the old guard of the party and some influential folks across the district pushing back. And not asking me directly. I was about as transparent as you could possibly be. Everything I did, I posted. Every question I could answer, I put online. And then I would hear sort of what I've called a whisper campaign of questions about this or questions about that I was happy to address, but I never had an audience. I had gone so far as to ask every central committee and every club if they would sponsor a forum or a debate. And they either were too busy, couldn't do it, or didn't want to engage because of their bylaws. And it was frustrating whenever I was asking for transparency. I wanted to present myself along with the other candidates to, whether it was club members, the public, or a central committee, whatever the format, and make it as neutral as possible. We were met with either indifference or outright opposition. And that made it difficult. So I would say, whenever you get involved in this, you've got to build those bridges early and then know that they're never secure. Whenever Mariella jumped in, we thought that Ficker was going to be the spoiler for Mariella. Mariella ended up being the spoiler for Ficker. She came in very late, didn't do a lot of campaigning. And quite frankly, she got about 8,000 votes. And that, of course, changed the outcome. So then as a party, you realize that we're not very engaged in the primary process. We kind of leave it to chance. And then you get an outcome that I don't know that most people are very pleased with. But here we are now in a position entering a general election, quite frankly, that we could have won, not on great footing. I don't know that the strongest candidate made it through, certainly for the general election. And here we are as a party, once again, scratching our heads like, why can't we put in a better fight? And I think we spent a lot of times beating ourselves up.
Well, you mentioned a very good point, Chris. I think that you had a legitimate shot at taking out the Goliath, in the general election, which is going to be April Delaney. And now Robin Ficker has to take her on. And I don't see a good outcome there.
No, and I think what you needed to do is you had to take Delaney on, or Trone, on substance. You can't rely on Republican talking points alone because we're in a deficit. So you have to have a value proposition. You have to solve a problem that's going to be more than just bumper sticker statements that are echoed across all Republican candidates. That's a starting point. And I think those are core values that need to be repeated. But then you have to be able to articulate solutions, whether it's national security and foreign policy and the role of Congress in terms of funding and oversight, whether it's understanding intelligence oversight, or more importantly, looking at what are the levers that are available to a congressman. And the big one is, of course, is funding. And that was where we were looking at the innovation corridor to leverage our federal highway network, looking at the CHIPS Act and the Innovation and Jobs Act and a few other federal sources. So we wouldn't have to raise taxes. We wouldn't have to impose any fees. We could use federal dollars to essentially serve as a carrot or as a stick to get Annapolis in line, to then also support counties to protect their local residents, zone in accordance with development that is sustainable and aligns with their interests and needs, and then move Annapolis in the direction we needed to move them. And that was the level of detail that I would have expected any candidate to be forced to present. And that was why I was asking for debates. That's why I was asking for opportunities to answer those tough questions about, well, of course, we all want lower taxes. Of course, we want fewer regulations. Of course, we want to create jobs. How are you going to do that? How are you going to use this position? How are you going to align your interests with each of the counties in the state to make things better for residents? And quite frankly, I didn't hear a lot of that. And now that we're going into a general election, Delaney is absolutely bruised. I mean, she ran against Trone. He came at her from the left, and I think she moved to the left quite a bit. And we were prepared to attack her on positions she had taken that do not align with the district. I do not think she had an answer for the innovation corridor. I was hoping she would talk about national security or foreign policy, because she would just fall completely flat. And then I was looking forward to debating her. I just don't know that we're going to have that level of ammunition or a preparation, quite frankly, with Robin. I think he does a very good job of running a bumper sticker campaign. He spent about $500,000 of his own money, and he did a great job of self-promotion. I just don't see him presenting any solutions that are going to move the needle for not only CD6, but then I'm concerned at what is the effect on down ticket candidates. He runs a campaign that's not exactly built on substance, and he's got some baggage. And I think some other folks are going to have to answer questions about his baggage that shouldn't have to. This was really an unforced error that I feel like we walked into.
You know, you mentioned Trone and you mentioned Delaney, both millionaires running for a position that pays less than $160,000 a year. Yeah. What's your take on that? What's up with these millionaires spending all their own money, including Ficker, to take a position that literally makes, less than one of their campaign ads?
To be honest, I mean, with Trone, it was, of course, ego. With Delaney, I think it's, I hate to say it, I think it's just she wanted something to do. She had been a Biden appointee. I think she views this almost like she just runs on national platitudes. I don't know that this is a calling for her. That was part of why I thought this was such a great opportunity. Whether it was Trone or Delaney, they're cut from the same cloth. You could take the same approach, a lifetime of service, a lifetime of substance, solving problems, setting conditions for similarly situated families against one of two out of district, out of touch multimillionaires. There was a great alignment there in terms of what this campaign was going to present as opposed to what Delaney or Trone could even attempt to present. Unfortunately, now we've nominated, what is just another self-funded empty barrel, quite frankly. I don't know. I mean, I made it a point throughout the campaign. I didn't feel the need to attack Ficker. I felt like I wanted to win on the merit of my ideas, of the viability of the campaign. And in hindsight, I probably should have talked about, his disciplinary actions under the state bar, his 3 times being disbarred indefinitely, and then finally on a 4th time being disbarred permanently. It burns my blood to see that he claims a veteran status given his military record. These are things I didn't feel the need to raise during the primary because I didn't, quite frankly, want to bash another Republican. I thought we should run a primary based on capacity and electability. And unfortunately, maybe we missed an opportunity than some of the other, Fickerisms over the year.
Fickerisms, very good, very good. Well done.
Yes, and of course, Robin Ficker has been a prominent member of the state Republican Party for going on decades now. This is literally what goes on in campaigns from the local level to the national level. I mean, essentially, what you're doing is you're peeling back the canvas, so to speak, and allowing the public to see how the sausage is made. But what you also bring up is that when it comes to substance, particularly in the primaries, and this is true across parties, across the country, it appears, as many have said, like I said, on both sides of the spectrum, that the primaries have become kind of a race to the most extreme as opposed to a race to substance. And you could see that particularly with the Democrats this year in Maryland, but also other states like New York and such, where the Democratic Socialists of America have, by some appearances, taken over some of these state parties, possibly Maryland as well. I know you were dealing with the Republican side, but is there anything on the Democrat side that you saw in that regards that struck you?
Well, I think in general, it's a race to the bottom. We're no longer running on substance. I mean, essentially a primary is a year-long job interview. And I would expect voters to challenge candidates, whether it's at a debate, whether it's at a candidate forum, or it's online. What I see with the Democrat Party right now, it's quite frankly, it's absurd. I was looking forward to presenting my opposition to the direction they're going in. They're moving in a direction that's illogical. It's irrational. It's based on an expectation of entitlement. It's based on an expectation of elevating victimhood to a virtue. And these are things that I think there's a reason why they're losing voters. There's a reason why they have to blame Trump for everything, because they have no substance. And I was looking forward to the opportunity to elevating this race, making it a national race, and then making it a discussion about the socialist movement, and looking at some of these candidates across other races and saying, look, we have to plant a flag, and we've got to be proud of the country that we've all come to love and cherish, and what all three of us have fought for. We have to look at the common values that have made this country great, and that if we find ourselves going down a path that doesn't allow us to celebrate this country, that celebrates the individual excellence that has defined this country for the last 250 years, then we're just on the wrong path. And I was looking forward to having that discussion, because I really feel like, if properly framed, this could be, in fact, a red wave. Because if we take on, and we're the party of solutions, we're the party talking about economic development, we're the party addressing affordability, we're the party that's saying, look, we're not going to talk about all this entitlement crap and free stuff. We're going to provide you with the opportunity to leverage your skill set, to leverage your ambition, and then achieve the success that you'll earn. And I think that resonates, but we've allowed this to get hijacked, and then we're starting to see where this sprint to the bottom on both sides has left us with candidates that aren't really able to articulate a better solution other than national talking points, and then trying to rally their base in a gerrymandered state.
Chris, you brought up the Democrats and their strategies, but they are effective in the sense that there are some disenfranchised voters from both parties that seem to be attracted to this socialism and democratic socialist movement and all this other stuff. And the Dems are definitely taking advantage of that.
Well, I mean, they're emotionally manipulative, and I'll leave it at that. Whether it's the race baiting, whether it's this talk about how we're reviewing some of these entitlements that are meant to be safety nets that are now being created as sort of we're expanding that realm of what's available and who it's available to. I mean, those are enticing positions. So on the one side, if you have folks saying, hey, look, we have to govern responsibly, instead of looking at ways to extend and expand entitlements, we have to look at why so many people need them. We have to create opportunity rather than expand this sort of wealth redistribution. And unfortunately, whenever you have a disengaged electorate, or you have folks that feel disenfranchised, they're going to hit the easy button, which is they want to go with the side that either is easier to digest because it aligns with their basic expectation of being a good person, if that's what they think giving things away is what makes them a good person, or if it's something that's going to feel like it's going to make their lives easier without really putting into work or understanding the consequences. The short version is, I think you have voters that they're somewhat enamored by the quick fixes and the solution. I mean, look at what Mondami was offering: free bus rides, free childcare, looking at rent freezes. All of these things cost money. You can't just wish that away. And then it's all done in the name of let's tax the rich. Well, essentially, you're punishing success. Yes, there is this sense that, well, they should pay their share. Oftentimes, they pay more than their share. And this idea that we can redistribute wealth despite what your input to that system is inherently unfair. And unfortunately, whenever you incentivize doing less, people will do less. There's a reason why socialism and communism have failed. Unfortunately, human nature is sort of driven by competition and achievement. But whenever you substitute that for handouts and redistribution, well, unfortunately, you're going to have folks that are going to gravitate to that. And I think we need to start having this discussion. And I think we need to be able to combat what they're offering with a digestible alternative, which is to say, look, we're going to set conditions for you to succeed. We want to empower you. You shouldn't have to rely on a county, state, or federal program to take care of your family. You should know that if you apply yourself, whether it's being able to show up to work on time, getting an education, or whatever it is that you do, you should have the benefit of that. But unfortunately, in Maryland in particular, they've regulated so many industries out of existence that there's not a lot of the blue collar work that, quite frankly, I grew up doing, that my family benefited from in Western Pennsylvania. So when you take out that blue collar base and then you start to sort of substitute that for dependency, you don't give them an alternative. You have service industry jobs or you have retail type jobs. Well, that's not enough to raise a family. You're almost creating the demand for the entitlements that you're handing out. And if wouldn't go so far as to say they do this intentionally, but borderline, they create dependency, then they point to the dependency as to why they need to be staying in power. So I hope we can solve this. And my hope is that more people that have a background in the military are going to step up and lead selflessly to set the conditions for other people to have success, and that success will breed what is a collective sense of direction. that is in the form of free market capitalism, free market opportunity, rather than direction that the socialist Democrats are trying to go.
And I think you hit the key phrase there where you said it's almost as if they create the dependency that they then point to.
Well, I think some of it's well-intentioned. Like, I think they might actually believe, hey, I've got to help here. Mm-hmm. And that's why I don't know that it's all malicious. It may be well-intentioned, but my dad said it. The path to hell was paved with good intentions. And I can't help but think that's a lot of the Democrat platform.
Yes. I'm not sure that your dad came up with that expression, Chris.
Probably not.
But it's a good one.
He's the first one. He said it enough times that it had an impact.
Believe me, we were raised by the same dad. I had a Navy chief master sergeant, and he is my dad. He was. Well, you ever see the movie The Great Santini?
Yes.
He was a great Santini.
Sounds like he did a great job too.
One of the things I found interesting is you were describing about going to those polling places, and there weren't very many people there. And I spent some time at the polling places as well. And one of the things is I was speaking to both Republicans and Democrat politicians who were there. The young liberals, the young Democrats that were there, was a different group of people than I am used to. Actually, they were much more like the way I was 30 years ago. You know, I was raised as a Democrat. I consider myself a very moderate person.
As was I.
Yeah. And there is a definite, on one spectrum, we have what we're talking about with the DSA, but on the other spectrum, there appears to be an awareness that the dysfunction is broad and somewhat purposeful, and not necessarily the good and bad actors are not necessarily who they have been told are the good and bad actors through the social media and all of those different things. I found it fascinating because I have not seen that undercurrent in many, many years. So I do have hope for the future in that regards. What are your plans for the future?
Well, I don't think I'll run again. Like I said, I knew I had an opportunity here to tap into some of that, quite frankly. And that was the idea was to run on a military record, to not have any distractions and focus on just running a campaign that was honest and honorable. That was why I didn't go after Ficker. That's why I didn't want to kind of get into the mud and start slinging mud in a primary. I thought we had a very good proposal that would resonate, particularly with young people. And that was some of the feedback I got. A lot of those young Democrat volunteers really liked this idea of problem solving, as opposed to just speaking in platitudes and bumper stickers. I was amazed at how well they knew the innovation corridor. And they had questions about small modular reactors. They had questions about water treatment. They had questions about how you align county level zoning with state tax provisions and then federal funding. And they found that to be a very worthwhile proposal. And that was exactly what we were trying to tap into, which was, you're going to hit your base, you're going to tap into that unaffiliated swath, and then you're going to look at those soft Dems that are like, hey, this is a good solution. This is what leadership looks like. And that is taking on a problem, putting your name next to it, and then accepting the criticism or the feedback, and then working it to a solution. So I don't know that I'll run again, because what I'm finding out is I can solve more problems not running for office. I'm looking at converting the innovation corridor into a PAC, and I've already found a national security PAC that I can fit this under. So instead of having to file separately and create a separate PAC, I can put this under the umbrella of a national security PAC that does a lot of veterans advocacy, a lot of veterans affairs, but also talks quite a bit about national security and foreign policy, all areas that I want to continue to work in. So I think I'm just going to bring the innovation corridor under that umbrella. And then I'm looking for work right now, either within the administration or in DC, in the national security or foreign policy space. I didn't want to come off active duty and try starting a civilian career and run for office. So that was a massive financial heartache for my family. We went from I was making active duty to a retirement, and it was a fraction of the money. So there wasn't we didn't do a lot of traveling as a family. There were not a lot of new shoes. There was not a lot of what I should call disposable income in the Burnett household.
More bologna sandwiches.
Yeah, or just bread.
That's a wish sandwich, Chris. Bread. That's a wish sandwich. You got two pieces of bread and you wish you had some meat to put between them.
So the Burnett family was on bread and water for the last couple of months. But the short answer is I think I'm going to obviously now pivot to a civilian career. I'm going to try to stay involved because I think there's an opportunity here to help a lot of people. And that was always the plan. And I saw an opportunity to solve a problem that could help a lot of people. And so I think if I focus on that, which is developing out the innovation corridor, looking at how we can affect policy, legislation, priorities, looking at private equity, how we can educate the public on some of these different technologies, how we can protect the public from what is going to be arriving one way or the other. And if we can ensure that their interests and needs are met, we can avoid an Adamstown. So I think we'll have to just see where all this goes. But in the short term, I got to find a job, and I've got to translate the innovation corridor now into more of an advisory and issue/education type pack.
Well, we know that a man of your integrity, character, and abilities is going to be able to find a great job very, very quickly. I just wish it had been congressman.
Well, I hope I can find a job, and I appreciate that. Thanks.
Listen, Chris, we've had a lot of politicians on this show, but nobody had the purpose or a plan the way you did.
Because I thought we really had a great platform to go into the general election and make CD6 very competitive. In fact, when I crunched the numbers, we had a pathway to victory.
But having spent a career in the military, and now having gone through what for most people is a very almost traumatizing experience, transitioning from the military culture to the civilian culture, what is kind of your biggest conclusions from a lifetime in the military and now your experience here in the civilian sector?
Gentlemen know this as well as I do. Your accountability is everything. You are what you are, your performance. And that's how I approach this. And that was where I think somewhat naively, I thought you demonstrate competency, you build trust, and then you build a plan to succeed. And what I wasn't necessarily prepared for was how self-interest could drive or undermine support. And that's a different culture, and I get that, and I'm learning that. They don't, on the private sector side, it's really what's in it for me, as opposed to in the military, you look first at how do I set the conditions for other people to succeed. And I think it was funny. I had people quoting that back to me constantly. I kept saying, set conditions, set conditions, set conditions, because I had heard that time and time again on active duty. My sole purpose was to set the conditions for other people to succeed, for other people to go conduct a mission, to do it as effectively and efficiently as possible, and then come back home. How I'm going to take those lessons and then apply them to a very different environment in terms of personal relationships, individual priorities, and then how you can try to galvanize that around a common sense of purpose and direction. And in this case, it was a campaign. Ideally, I'll be able to take that same approach and be able to effectuate some level of change in terms of creating economic development across Western Maryland. That's all you can do, though, is you give everything you've got, and you sprint to the very end. And then as soon as you get knocked down, you get back up again, and you try to do it again or do it a different way, but still stay focused on the problem. Because at the end of the day, there are still people that need a job. There are still people that are struggling to pay their utilities. There are still people that are struggling to pay their property taxes.
Yeah, it's called half of Maryland right now.
And that's a problem worth solving.
Quality of life from even just 10 years ago. And the loss of that is tragic, but also unnecessary. It didn't have to happen, that the younger generation in America today is looking around and saying, wait a second, how are we going to thrive? That has never before occurred in America. There was no reason for it ever. And there still isn't a reason for it, and it can be turned around. And I want to thank you for putting in your significant time and effort over not just the campaign, but again over many years to make that a reality for Americans today and tomorrow.
Well, I appreciate it, and I'm hoping that we can find again a common sense of purpose and direction as citizens of this great country and this great state. If right now I feel like people are consumed with their own pettiness, and that sort of drives the entitlement, it drives the victimhood, it drives a lot of these things that if you don't have an external problem and your only question is how much wealth or how much material stuff you can accumulate, well, then suddenly these things become important. But I feel like if we can get back to focusing on how we can move in a common direction that sets the conditions for people to prosper and make their own choices, I think we'll restore some hope and ideally solve some problems for people. That's all the three of us ever knew is in the military is you serve for others. And then if you can carry that into a community position at any level, then you're doing a good thing.
Agreed. And the military is a great training ground for our young people. Unfortunately, very few are going into it anymore.
Well, I think we're hitting the recruiting goals again. You know, I think that what Pete Hegseth has done, I think he's focused on mission accomplishment. And I think he looked at a lot of the things that were starting to creep in towards the end of the Biden administration, and he's gotten rid of that. And it was amazing. You start treating service members like service members and they thrive.
They start acting like service members.
Yes. I had this conversation with commanders. I remember at one point, he was like, oh, what do we do with, the Marines are acting up? And I was like, treat them like Marines. If we want to have, a Hawaiian shirt Friday, well, they're going to not take themselves too seriously, but you take them out on a 10-mile hike, you take them to the range, you do some live fire, and they feel like they're doing the thing that they signed up for. Well, now suddenly they'll take pride in that sacrifice. They'll take pride in that collective sense of agony, that we've all experienced, but there's value in that. So I think if we can get back to that'll go a long way.
Recently, Chris, I was at J-Bear up in Alaska. And my nephew is Air Force up there, and I went to visit him last weekend. And there is a sense of renewal on the military bases. You can tell that people are proud to be in the military again. It's refreshing. It was refreshing to see these young people actually patriotic, enjoying their military service, enjoying giving, enjoying sacrificing, for the greater good, which is something that a whole generation has been taught, is wrong. These military men and women were portraying that. So that was enjoyable to see.
Yeah. And I know we're probably running short on time, but the last thing I'll say about this in terms of the larger impact, character is shaped in adversity. And as a society, we've become so risk averse and we've become so insulated from consequence, whether it's screen time or doing things online versus experiencing any difficulties or suffering. And I feel like that's also what's happening in the military, that we were focused on everything other than forging a sense of achievement through adversity, overcoming discomfort. And I think we have to get back to that. And I think once we get that victim mindset of, instead of celebrating somebody's suffering, encourage it, have them work through it rather than sort of fixing it for them, preventing them from bearing the consequence of it. And I think that will go a long way of reshaping our discourse, giving people a sense of purpose. And now, instead of looking at those entitlement programs as a starting point, we can start looking at how we can trim them, because we've substituted entitlement with opportunity.
Those are words of wisdom, Chris, and a great way to end this episode of Mid-Maryland Votes. Thank you, Chris, for being on. We really enjoyed talking to you. Please don't be a stranger, even though you're not running for office anymore. We'd love to have you back on.
It was great. Thanks again, gents. This has been great.
Hey, this has been this episode of Mid-Maryland Votes. I'm your host, Mark Flynn. With me, as always, is my co-host,
Houston Lowen.
And we just thank Chris Burnett for showing up on the show and educating us as he always does. Thanks again for being on Mid-Maryland Votes. We'll see you next time. That was retired Marine Chris Burnett sharing his perspective on politics, public service, and what comes after a hard-fought campaign. Whether his next chapter is in the public office or the private sector, one thing hasn't changed: his commitment to leadership and serving others. Mid-Maryland Votes, bringing people from different backgrounds together to talk, listen, disagree, and still part as friends. Like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, and we will see you next time on Mid-Maryland Votes.